The drone of the Vespid colony on Xylos Prime was a symphony of industry, a constant, low thrumming that resonated through the crystalline structures of their hives. It was a sound that spoke of efficiency, of purpose, of the relentless pursuit of energy and the refinement of raw materials into the plasma-rich compounds that fueled their very existence. For generations uncounted, the Vespid stingwings of the Corvat expanse had followed a predictable cycle: locate resource-rich asteroids or suitable planetary deposits, establish a colony, extract, refine, build their elegant comb structures, reproduce, and move on. Their venom plasma weapons, fearsome and effective, were the apex of their technological achievement, a natural extension of their biological imperative. But on Xylos Prime, something was different. The world itself was a treasure trove, its skies swirling with nebulae of precious gases, its surface veined with exotic minerals. It was a verdant, promising place, ripe for harvesting. The lead strain leader, designated by the TOE as Xylos due to its dominant presence and the world it now claimed, was a magnificent specimen, larger than its peers, with wings that shimmered with an unusual, almost iridescent purple hue. It bore the marks of countless battles and the scars of harsh survival. Its communion organ, typically a conduit for the psychic commands that bound the colony into a single, cohesive entity, was a particularly pronounced node of intricate chitinous filigree, throbbing with a subtle internal light. It was this organ that was the source of the anomaly. Where other strain leaders received and transmitted the sharp, crystalline instructions for mining vectors, for defensive postures, for plasma conduit calibration, Xylos received whispers, faint, ethereal echoes that resonated not with the hard logic of planetary geophysics or the tactical calculus of threat assessment, but with something far more profound, far more unsettling. These were not the coherent thoughts of a sentient being, nor the predictable data streams of a sensor array. They were like the distant, mournful keen of a star whale lost in the void, or the barely perceptible shudder of reality as a distant nova flared. They were resonances, harmonies, and disharmonies that spoke of existence beyond the physical, of unseen currents in the very fabric of space-time. At first, Xylos dismissed them as a flaw, a subtle imperfection in its otherwise flawless biology. It tried to filter them out, to focus on the tangible, the material. But the whispers grew, intertwining with the normal flow of colonial command, subtly altering the very nature of its directives. The worker Vespid, typically unthinking conduits of the strain leader's will, began to execute strange, novel instructions. instead of directing plasma excavators to bore deep into the planet's crust for deuterium-rich deposits, Xylos found itself ordering the construction of colossal, spiraling comb structures on the surface. These were not the hexagonal plasma storage matrices or the weapon refinement nodes that defined Vespid architecture. No, these new structures were organic, flowing, intricate constructions woven from a newly discovered crystalline compound unique to Xylos Prime, a mineral that hummed with a subtle, unnerving energy. These new combs lacked any discernible purpose. They weren't conduits for plasma, nor did they house nurseries for the young. They simply were, growing in complex, mathematically impossible patterns across vast swaths of the planet's surface. They twisted upon themselves, forming Mobius strips of hardened chitin and shimmering crystal, creating impossible angles and curves that seemed to defy geometry. The worker Vespid, compelled by Xylos's unwavering will, spent cycles constructing these bizarre edifices, their innate understanding of efficiency and purpose overridden by the sheer, unyielding imperative of their strain leader. They moved with an almost frantic energy, their mandibles clicking as they harvested the strange, glowing crystals and extruded the resilient chitin, weaving these unnatural structures into existence. The other, lesser strain leaders, the lieutenants of the colony, sensed the deviation. Their own communion organs, less potent, less attuned, picked up the discordant notes in Xylos's directives. There was a subtle wrongness to the commands, a departure from the ancestral patterns of Vespid expansion. They attempted to question, sending back waves of hesitant thought pulses, seeking clarification. But Xylos's will, amplified by the very energies it now felt, crushed any dissent. Its commands became sharper, more insistent, radiating an aura of absolute authority that brooked no challenge. The lesser leaders, unable to resist the overwhelming psychic pressure, returned to their duties, their confusion suppressed, their instincts overridden. As the first gargantuan comb structures began to take shape, covering kilometers of the planetary surface, subtle changes began to manifest around them. The light of Xylos Prime's twin suns, usually a predictable, steady glow, would occasionally refract in impossible ways, bending around the crystalline spirals, creating shimmering mirages where none should exist. The air would sometimes shimmer, the scent of the verdant flora of Xylos Prime momentarily replaced by the faintest whiff of ozone and something indescribably metallic, alien. Sounds would echo strangely, a single click of a worker's mandible, sometimes reverberating as if from a vast canyon, then vanishing entirely. Xylos itself was becoming increasingly consumed by the whispers. Its iridescent wings, once a mark of its strength, now quivered with an almost perpetual unease. Its multifaceted eyes, normally keen and focused, sometimes unfocused, staring into distances that did not physically exist. The whispers were no longer just faint echoes. They were growing louder, forming into a cacophony of impossible colors and non-Euclidean geometries within its consciousness. It perceived swirling mists of raw thought, impossible entities moving through spaces that defied comprehension, and a boundless ocean of despair and elation, coiling and unfurling beyond the veil of physical reality. It did not understand what it perceived, but it felt it deep within its very being, a sensation both terrifying and intoxicating. And with this perception came a terrifying certainty. The whispers were hungry. They craved form, craved manifestation, and the comb structures Xylos commanded were providing a conduit. Each crystalline lattice, each chitinous curve, was not just an architectural marvel, but a knot in the fabric of existence, a nascent anchor point for the chaotic energies that Xylos now instinctively drew upon. It was creating, unknowingly, the very foundations of something truly monstrous. The natural order of the Vespid, their predictable, brutal existence, was being irrevocably warped by an influence they could not comprehend, guided by a leader whose communion organ had become a receiver for the very fabric of madness that churned beyond the stars. The skies of Xylos Prime, once clear and predictable, now sometimes rippled with faint, ephemeral glows, like distant lightning in a perpetual storm that existed beyond human, or toe, or Vespid perception. The planet, once merely a resource, was becoming something else entirely, an unwitting beacon in the dark, drawing the attention of powers both mundane and utterly abhorrent. The air around the spiraling comb structures of Xylos Prime grew heavy, not with humidity or the dust of industry, but with a palpable sense of wrongness. It was as if the very atoms of the atmosphere were being stretched thin, then compressed, then rearranged into configurations that mocked the laws of physics. The initial, subtle refractions of light and the errant echoes had escalated into a symphony of unsettling phenomena, a constant, low-level assault on the senses of any creature unfortunate enough to dwell within the growing aura of the bizarre architecture. Worker Vespid, their chitinous forms usually precise and unwavering in their movements, now stumbled occasionally. A drone carrying a load of the glowing, crystalline minerals might find its path suddenly extended, the ground beneath its multiple legs seeming to stretch into an impossible distance, only to snap back to normal a moment later, causing it to lose its footing and spill its precious cargo. Other times, the ground would inexplicably shrink, and a worker would find itself colliding with a structure it had perceived as being several meters away, its mandibles clicking in disoriented confusion. The concept of fixed distance, of predictable spatial relationships, was dissolving. The light was perhaps the most unsettling visual distortion. Instead of the steady, warm glow of Xylos Prime's twin suns, shadows danced where no object stood, sometimes stretching long and thin from non-existent sources, only to abruptly shorten and thicken. Colors themselves seemed to shift and bleed, the vibrant greens of the native flora briefly morphing into sickly purples or eye-watering oranges before snapping back to their true hues. A particularly large comb structure, resembling a Mobius strip woven from obsidian and shimmering crystal, would sometimes appear to be simultaneously twisting inwards and outwards, its surface exhibiting patterns that seemed to shift and reorganize themselves, utterly defying the principles of perspective. Staring too long at these structures could induce a profound nausea, a deep-seated rejection by the optic nerve of what it was being forced to perceive. Auditory anomalies were equally disorienting. The rhythmic hum of the colony, the precise clicks of worker mandibles, the subtle rustle of countless wings, all these familiar sounds became unreliable. A sound originating from a worker directly beside another might arrive moments late, or from an entirely different direction, echoing as if through a vast, cavernous space before abruptly cutting out. Conversations carried via the communal psychic hum were frequently disrupted. Segments of thought pulses twisting into unintelligible static, or worse, into garbled echoes of past commands, overlaid with strange, dissonant chords that vibrated deep within the vespid's sensitive antenna. Sometimes, a high-pitched, almost musical whine would cut through the air, emanating from nowhere and everywhere, a sound that seemed to scrape against the very essence of reason. Even gravity seemed to waver. Lesser worker drones, laden with construction materials, would occasionally find their loads momentarily lighter, almost weightless, their flight path erratically altered. Then, with an abrupt lurch, the materials would regain their full mass, sometimes more, causing the drone to plummet clumsily to the ground, its delicate wings struggling to compensate. Pockets of localized zero gravity would manifest, causing small crystals and detritus to float eerily in the air before dropping back down with a sudden clatter. This chaotic fluctuation made any sustained, efficient work incredibly difficult, threatening to derail the entire construction effort. Yet, despite the pervasive disorientation, the colony continued its tireless work. Xylos's commands, though infused with an increasingly alien logic, remained absolute. The strain leader's communion organ pulsed with a fierce, almost painful intensity, driving its will into every single worker, every lesser leader. It was an iron will, overriding instinct, overcoming confusion, and suppressing the nascent alarm that flickered in the collective consciousness of the colony. The whispers from the void had become Xylos's new reality, and through its powerful psychic link, it was forcing that reality onto its subjects, the lesser strain leaders, those with enough independent thought to register the profound deviations from standard Vespid operational parameters, were in a state of profound, silent distress. Their own communion organs, while filtering the raw, chaotic energies that Xylos channeled, still picked up enough of the pervasive wrongness to cause them palpable discomfort. They observed their workers stumbling, their established pathways becoming unreliable, their senses being constantly deceived. They saw the comb structures, vast and incomprehensible, consuming immense resources and yielding no plasma, no weapons, no evident advantage for the colony. Everything they knew about survival, about expansion, about the immutable laws of the universe, was being contradicted. One particularly venerable lesser strain leader, designated Kylar by Tau researchers in the future for its distinctive wing scar, attempted a more direct challenge. It sent a series of carefully modulated thought pulses to Xylos, highlighting the resource drain, the declining efficiency, the evident danger to the colony's long-term health. It articulated, as best as its Vespid intellect allowed, the sheer illogicality of the current directives. Xylos's response was immediate and overwhelming. A psychic wave of pure, unadulterated dominance slammed into Kylar's consciousness. It wasn't a denial or a counter-argument. It was an absolute assertion of will that crushed all dissent. Kylar felt its own thoughts scatter, its carefully reasoned arguments dissolving into fear and absolute obedience. It recoiled, its body trembling, its communion organ throbbing with phantom pain. The message was clear. There was no questioning Xylos. There was only the will of the strain leader, now amplified and distorted by the alien energies it was drawing upon. From that point, even the flicker of dissent vanished. The Vespid colony became a single, unthinking tool in Xylos's grasp, driven by a relentless, instinct overriding compulsion to build. They harvested the glowing crystals, extruded the chitin, and wove the impossible comb structures, even as the world around them continued to unravel. Minor temporal shifts became more frequent. A worker might pass through a particularly large crystalline archway and emerge a moment before it entered, creating a brief, disorienting paradox. Small, non-sentient native fauna would occasionally vanish mid-flight, only to reappear several meters away, confused and unharmed. Or sometimes, tragically, reappear fused with a rock or another unfortunate creature. The ground itself seemed to ripple, the very earth becoming fluid and unpredictable near the most active construction sites. Geysers of plasma-rich gases, usually erupting with predictable rhythm, would sometimes freeze in mid-air, their incandescent forms suspended as glowing sculptures, only to burst forth moments later, roaring across the landscape. The atmosphere itself felt thinner, somehow, as if the air was constantly being siphoned off, only to be replenished by something colder, sharper, carrying the faint, metallic tang of an impossible, distant storm. The entire planet, Xylos Prime, was becoming a living canvas for Xylos's unsettling vision, a terrifying testament to its unwilling communion with the unseen. And as the reality warping effects intensified, they began to radiate outwards from the colony, subtle at first, but inexorably expanding their sphere of influence. The ecosystem was twisting, the very progression of time within the affected zones becoming fragmented. The Vespid themselves, once mere instruments, were becoming acclimatized, their biology subtly adapting to the chaotic shifts, their senses dulled to the absurdities that unfolded around them. They were no longer merely building. They were living within a distorted dream, shaped by the will of their leader and the whispers from the void. A shimmering anomaly in the void, a distant glimmer of nascent psychic energy that bled into real space, was a minor blip on the deep space auspex arrays of the TOW prospecting fleet. The greater goods harvest. Normally, such a faint and erratic signature would be dismissed as stellar background radiation, or an unusual cosmic phenomenon, unworthy of diversion. The TOW, ever pragmatic and focused on the empirical, had little patience for the ethereal. Their philosophy, the pursuit of the greater good, was built on scientific understanding, logical progression, and the quantifiable. The warp, in their enlightened view, was a barbaric superstition, a primitive concept of a galaxy yet to fully embrace the light of reason. Yet, as the fleet, under the command of Shaso Tauza, approached the fringe of the Korvat expanse, the blip persisted. It was erratic, spiking, and then vanishing, like a phantom heartbeat. The planet at the heart of these fluctuations, designated XP-371 by the automated survey drones, showed immense promise. Lush and teeming with exotic flora, its geological surveys indicated vast deposits of rare minerals and atmospheric gases ideal for plasma refinement, precisely what the greater goods harvest was sent to find. The opportunity was too significant to ignore, even with the perplexing sensor readings. Xylos, the atmospheric composition of XP-371, is within optimal parameters for a new colony, reported an eye-controlled analytics drone, its vocalizator calm and precise. However, the energy readings from the surface are highly unusual. Multiple localized gravitational fluctuations and temporal distortions are registered. Further, there is a pervasive, low-level psychic resonance, unlike any previously catalogued Vespid colony world. Xylos Tauza, a seasoned commander whose battles against orcs and feral world raiders had earned him numerous accolades, regarded the holographic projection of XP-371 with a frown. His battle suit, a sleek XV-8 crisis model, hummed with barely contained power, a contrast to the contemplative pose he held. Psychic resonance? Explain, I. The energy signature is not consistent with any known Xylos life form. It is diffuse, chaotic, yet possesses a strange synchronicity, as if resonating with nothing we can quantify, Xylos. It's akin to a void echo, but localized and persistent. The drone paused, its databanks clearly struggling with the incongruity. Furthermore, our atmospheric drones have detected massive, non-standard structures across the primary continent. They are composed of native crystal and chitin, but their geometry is inconsistent. Inconsistent? Xylos Tauza repeated, his frown deepening. TOE technology, built on rigorous mathematical principles, rarely encountered inconsistent geometry. It suggested a fundamental deviation from logical construction. Are these Vespid structures? Have they integrated local resources in a unique way? Uncertain, Xylos. While they bear superficial resemblance to Vespid comb structures in material, their configuration defies known engineering principles. They generate localized field distortions and, at times, appear to bend light and even small fluctuations in the local temporal flow. A warrior of the fire caste, Xylos Tauza understood one thing above all. Information was power, and unknown variables were weaknesses. The Vespid were a known, albeit alien, ally species of the Tao Empire, integrated into the greater good as ferocious aerial shock troops. Their plasma weapons were formidable, their communal intelligence predictable. This anomaly was deeply unsettling. He made his decision. Assemble a Pathfinder team. Designation: Reconnaissance Team. Row 7. Their mission: infiltrate the primary continent, observe these structures and the Vespid colony, and gather detailed data on the energy signatures and the inconsistent geometry. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Stealth and observation are paramount. I want to know what these Xenos are building, and why it is defying our understanding of physics. Within hours, Reconnaissance Team Row 7, led by Shasui Vrela, descended through the upper atmosphere of XP 371. Their Manta dropship was a shadow against the swirling nebulae, its stealth generators purring silently. Vrela, a veteran pathfinder with dozens of successful planetary infiltrations under his belt, felt a familiar tension, but also an unfamiliar prickle of unease. His senses, honed by years of field work, registered a subtle wrongness in the very fabric of the air. A faint metallic tang overlaid with something less definable, like the taste of a storm yet to break. As they dropped through the cloud layer, the vastness of the Vespid structures became horrifyingly apparent. From orbit, they had been impressive. From the lower atmosphere, they were monstrous. They sprawled for kilometers, vast, crystalline and chitinous edifices that resembled nothing so much as mad architects' fever dreams made manifest, spiraling upwards in impossible curves, twisting inwards upon themselves, generating their own strange internal light. They mocked the Tao's understanding of structural integrity. Auspex readings are fluctuating, Shasui, reported Corwee Reel, the team's lead sensor specialist, his voice tight over the comms. Gravitational variances of up to 0.3 standard Gs within proximity of the largest structures. Localized temporal shifts are also registering, though too chaotic to accurately quantify. It's like the very ground is alive and deeply unwell. Vrela zoomed his optics, focusing on a particularly ornate structure that looked like an enormous, petrified fungal growth, riddled with crystalline tendrils that pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. He saw Vespid drones, thousands of them, swarming over its surface, adding new sections, weaving intricate patterns, their movements oddly jerky and unpredictable, as if navigating through invisible currents. Their usual single-minded efficiency was still present, but overlaid with a disconcerting instability. No visible plasma conduits, Vrela noted, his voice flat. No weapon emplacements, no conventional energy sinks. What in the greater good are they building? The Pathfinders landed their smaller drone skimmers in a dense forest kilometers from the main colony, their stealth fields engaged. As they moved on foot, the ambient strangeness grew more pronounced. Light filtered through the dense canopy in shimmering, unnatural streaks. Leaves on trees would occasionally vibrate with a silent, internal energy, or briefly change hue from green to an unsettling ochre. Distant chirps of local fauna would echo from impossible directions, sometimes seeming to come from directly behind them. Reaching a vantage point overlooking the nearest colossal structure, Vrela deployed his optical drone. The crystalline chitin architecture was breathtaking in its alienness. It pulsed with a muted, internal energy, and around its base, the very air visibly shimmered, creating a mirage effect that distorted the surrounding landscape. He saw a worker vespid, its mandibles clicking with intent, deposit a glowing crystal into a nascent lattice. For a moment, the crystal vanished, only to reappear a foot to the left, then slot itself perfectly into place. A silent grunt of confusion escaped the Pathfinder's comms. It's not just anomalous energy, Shazui, Riel whispered, his voice tinged with awe and fear. It's unreality. The fabric of space-time here is thin. It's being stretched. These structures, they aren't just reacting to the distortions, they're causing them. They're manifesting these phenomena. Vrela watched the Vespid swarm, utterly compelled by Xylos's directives, constructing architecture that defied all Toe understanding. Their plasma weaponry, their formidable aerial assaults, these were familiar threats. But this was an entirely new kind of danger, one that gnawed at the edges of his species' rational worldview. The greater good was built on order, on quantifiable progress. What they were witnessing was chaotic, unpredictable, and profoundly unsettling. The Vespid, allies of the Empire, were building monuments to madness, monuments that were already bending the very laws of the universe. The implications were horrifying, a wound in reality itself, carved by the very Xenos they sought to integrate. And deep within the largest, most twisted of the comb structures, Vrela's sensitive suit auspex registered a powerful, concentrated psychic signature, a focal point from which all the lesser strangeness seemed to emanate. It was Xylos, the strain leader, a conductor of chaos, unknowing of the dark symphony it was orchestrating. Across the immeasurable gulf of the immaterium where thoughts were physical constructs and emotions coalesced into entities of terrifying power, a consciousness stirred. It was ancient, vast, and steeped in the kaleidoscopic madness of the changer of ways. Lord Scythar, a demon prince of Tzench, had been weaving intricate schemes for millennia, manipulating mortal empires and celestial alignments, patiently nurturing nascent cults on distant worlds. His current focus was on a nascent psychic resonance, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the warp that had been growing steadily stronger for cycles. Initially, it was merely a curiosity, a minor ripple in the vast ocean of souls. Scythar had assumed it was another fledgling psyker, perhaps a rogue human astropath, or a particularly potent Eldar seer, inadvertently opening a channel to the Empyrean. Such events were commonplace, easily exploited, woven into his grand tapestry of deception and chaos. But as the tremor intensified, becoming a persistent thrum, Scythar noted its peculiar signature. It was not the distinct, individualistic resonance of a sentient mind. Instead, it was diffuse, raw, almost primal, as if an entire species was collectively brushing against the veil of reality without truly comprehending the act. The demon prince, a grotesque avian humanoid monstrosity of swirling feathers, obsidian claws, and eyes that burned with infernal intelligence, contemplated the source from his throne of impossible geometry within a crystal labyrinth deep in the warp. His mind, 1,000 shards of pure intellect, probed the strange new signature. He saw the world, Xylos Prime, a vibrant jewel in real space. He saw the Vespid, their insectoid forms bustling with industry. And he saw it, the communion organ of the strain leader, Xylos, acting as an unwitting conduit, a flawed lens focusing the vast, chaotic energies of the immaterium into the mundane reality of the physical universe. A delightful accident, Scythar croaked, his voice a chorus of whispers and screeches echoing through the halls of his immaterial palace. A species blind to the true nature of reality, yet possessed of a mechanism that allows them to touch it. And they build such fascinating structures, not for war, not for sustenance, but for distortion. He observed the growing comb structures through a scrying pool of liquid light, seeing the localized reality warps, the temporal dislocations, the bending of light and sound. These were crude, uncontrolled manifestations, but they were manifestations nonetheless. The Vespid, led by their strangely attuned leader, were unknowingly constructing anchors, conduits, and foci for the very energies Scythar reveled in. they were literally weaving the warp into the fabric of their world. The Daemon Prince decided to intervene. Not with brute force. That would be premature and might shatter his delicate new toy. No, manipulation was his forte. The subtle whisper, the insidious suggestion, the slow corruption of purpose. He extended tendrils of his own boundless consciousness toward Xylos Prime, not as a direct assault, but as a series of resonant frequencies, psychic echoes designed to entwine with the Vespid leader's already overstimulated communion organ. The whispers Xylos had been receiving suddenly gained a new layer of complexity. They ceased to be merely abstract vibrations of reality. Now they coalesced into fleeting, hallucinatory visions. Xylos saw impossible geometries expand and contract, not merely as an external observation, but as an intrinsic part of its own being. It saw pathways to untold power, not through brute force, but through the elegant manipulation of the cosmos itself. It perceived the comb structures it was building not as mere physical constructions, but as intricate mathematical equations given form. Equations that could unlock the hidden potential of the universe. These visions were not entirely coherent, nor were they direct commands. Xythar was too cunning for such obviousness. Instead, he presented tantalizing glimpses, fragments of impossible knowledge that resonated with the raw, untamed urges of the warp. He showed Xylos how the distortions could be controlled, how the chaotic shifts could be harnessed, how the very act of unraveling reality could be a source of immense energy and defensive capability. He implied, through these psychic imprints, that the strange comb structures were not a deviation from Vespid efficiency, but a higher form of it, a path to unprecedented power for its colony. Xylos, already overwhelmed by the torrent of sensation flowing through its unique communion organ, absorbed these new insights without question. Its Vespid mind, fundamentally incapable of comprehending the true nature of the warp or the insidious malevolence of a demon prince, interpreted them through the only lens it possessed: colonial survival and dominance. If these structures could twist reality, could they not create impossible shields? Could they not disorient enemies? Could they not conjure resources from nothing? The allure of such power, even if misunderstood, was undeniable. The commands emanating from Xylos to the rest of the colony sharpened. There was a new urgency, a renewed, almost feverish intensity. The precise patterns and geometries of the comb structures, which had seemed haphazard before, now took on a subtle, terrible symmetry. The distortions around them once purely chaotic, began to exhibit patterns, albeit alien ones. The temporal shifts, instead of being random, would now sometimes occur in rhythmic pulses, or create localized pockets where time either accelerated or slowed down, trapping unwary fauna in agonizingly extended moments of existence. Xythar watched, delighted. The Vespid leader was an ideal puppet. Its alien psychology, its communal mind, its instinctive drive for efficiency, combined with its unique biological anomaly, made it a perfect tool for his designs. It was building a gateway, slowly but surely, not a crude portal, but a gradual, insidious seepage of the warp into real space, anchored by the very fabric of the planet itself. The Daemon Prince intended to claim this world, to transform it into a living monument to Zenchayan change, a realm where the laws of physics were rewritten by his will, where reality was as malleable as clay. He saw the Tau approaching, their ships blazing with empirical light, their minds oblivious to the true nature of the energies they were detecting. Xythar merely chuckled, a sound like grinding crystal. They were yet another variable, another piece in the grand game. Perhaps they would attempt to integrate the Vespid, to understand their technology. That would be even better. A delightful opportunity for corruption and the sowing of discord, turning a burgeoning empire against itself with the seeds of madness. The greater good, indeed. Xythar knew only the greater chaos, and Xylos Prime was slowly, inexorably becoming his canvas. The whispers had found their voice, and that voice was now shaping a new, terrible reality. The Tau Pathfinder team, Row 7, watched from their concealed position, their optical sensors struggling to reconcile the impossible reality unfolding before them. Shas-Ui Vrela, normally unflappable, felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his chest. The concept of unreality was something the Tau had encountered only in the most abstract, theoretical terms, confined to the obscure, often classified archives concerning their more savage, superstition-driven neighbors, like the Imperium of man. Now it was manifest before them, built by their supposed allies, the Vespid. The energy output from the largest comb structure is increasing exponentially, Shas-Ui, reported Korui, real, his voice a strained whisper through the comms. Its gravitational field is fluctuating wildly. I'm detecting phase shifts, localized temporal dilation, even dimensional shearing. It's like the air is being torn and stitched back together in real time. Vrela zoomed his optics, focusing on the Vespid strain leader, Xylos. It hovered above the apex of the central, most grotesque comb, its iridescent wings beating with an almost manic energy. Its communion organ pulsed with a blinding inner light, and from it, waves of psychic energy radiated outward, compelling the thousands of worker Vespid below to build with a frenzied, desperate urgency. The commands were no longer merely strange. They were laced with an unnerving undertone of unquantifiable power. "It's not just building, Shasui," interjected Shasilato, the team's stealth specialist, his voice edged with disbelief. "It's changing things. Look!" Tos pointed with a trembling hand towards a section of the forest bordering the largest comb structure. A copse of alien trees, once vibrant green, abruptly withered and died, their leaves turning to ash in a silent, accelerated decay. But as quickly as they died, new growth erupted from the scorched earth, twisting into bizarre, iridescent forms, their branches resembling crystalline bone, their leaves pulsing with a faint, internal luminescence. The soil beneath them seemed to shift, organic matter transforming into a silvery, metallic dust. It was as if life and death, growth and decay were being sped up, reversed, and combined in defiance of natural law. The effects were no longer localized to minor ripples. A small creek, flowing placidly through the landscape, suddenly bifurcated around an invisible obstacle, its waters flowing in two separate directions for several meters before inexplicably merging back into a single stream, as if the very space between its banks had been folded. In another instance, a low-flying bird, native to Xylos Prime, flew too close to one of the smaller, spiraling ums. Mid-flight, its form wavered, becoming translucent, then stretched into an impossible, elongated blur before snapping back into its original shape, seemingly unharmed, but veering wildly away in terror. Vrela's mind, trained in the cold logic of the Tao, struggled to process this. These were not mere technological malfunctions. They were fundamental violations of reality. The Vespid were creating a new kind of environment, one where the laws of physics were suggestions, not absolutes. And Xylos, the strain leader, was the unwitting architect of this escalating madness. "They were generating resources, Shasui," exclaimed Korui, real, his voice rising in pitch. "My sensors are showing minute pockets of previously undetectable minerals appearing spontaneously near the nascent comb structures. And look, that cluster of atmospheric processors, it's not drawing from the air, it's refining nothing into usable gases." Indeed, a series of smaller, more conventional-looking Vespid structures had appeared around the larger reality-warping combs. These looked like advanced atmospheric scrubbers and mineral processors, but their input-output readings were utterly baffling. They were producing refined resources, plasma fuels, structural compounds, even complex organic proteins, from an absence of raw materials, seemingly conjuring them from the localized reality distortions generated by the larger combs. This was the new paradigm. Xylos, guided by the subtle, insidious whispers of the demon prince, was directing its colony to bypass the tedious, resource-intensive processes of conventional Vespid expansion. Why mine for plasma-rich gases when the comb structures could manifest them? Why build defensive walls of conventional materials when the very fabric of space around a hive could be made to warp, stretching incoming projectiles into harmless nothingness, or flickering enemies out of existence for a fleeting, disorienting moment? The efficiency was horrifying. The colony's growth rate, already rapid, had accelerated to an unprecedented degree. New Vespid nurseries were expanding at 3 times their normal rate, fueled by these conjured resources. Defensive swarms of stingwings, armed with newly manifested plasma weapons, patrolled the increasingly distorted skies around the colony. This is an existential threat to the greater good, Vrela declared, his voice grim. This technology, if it can even be called that, defies all our understanding. It's too powerful, too unpredictable. If the Vespid can simply will resources and defenses into existence, where does that leave the careful balance of our empire? He considered the implications. The Toe Empire was founded on integration, on bringing disparate species under the benevolent umbrella of the greater good. The Vespid were vital components, their fierce loyalty and potent plasma weaponry invaluable. But this was an unknown variable that could unravel everything. If other Vespid colonies, or worse, other integrated races, discovered such a method of expansion, one that bypassed the strictures of empirical science and relied on the manipulation of reality itself, it would sow chaos and destroy the very foundations of Tao society. It was not progress. It was an abomination. Send an emergency priority alpha burst to Shas-O Tausa, Vrela commanded, his decision made. Report on the reality distortions, the resource generation, and the apparent psychic focus of the strain leader. Recommend immediate quarantine of XP-371 and a full reevaluation of Vespid integration protocols. This is not a resource world, Ryle. It's a cancer, and it's growing. As the encrypted data burst, shot through the void towards Data, the greater goods harvest, the Pathfinder team watched as a section of the vast comb structure they were observing briefly flickered out of existence, only to reappear moments later, subtly altered. A new archway had formed, leading to nowhere, its dimensions impossibly vast, yet seeming to occupy no physical space. Inside, Vrela swore he saw, for a fleeting instant, not the endless drone of Vespid workers, but a glimpse of something else entirely. Swirling colors, impossible forms, and the faint, almost imperceptible sound of a distant, mocking laughter. The eye of the greater good had opened upon a horror, and it was deeply, fundamentally unprepared for what it beheld. The bridge of the greater goods harvest was a theater of controlled chaos, its holographic displays flickering with alarming data streams. Xylos Tausa stood before the main projection of XP-371, his expression grim. The raw data from Pathfinder Team Row 7, unfiltered and chilling in its implications, was being analyzed by an array of AI constructs, each struggling to reconcile the impossible. Gravitational singularities forming and dissipating within the atmosphere, reported a navigation eye, its voice strained. Localized temporal dilation fields, some extending up to 100 kilometers from the surface. Multiple reports of reality fractures, where environmental data simply ceases to exist, then reappears, subtly altered. It is defying all known physical models. Xylos. The full, unedited report from Xylos Vrela had been terse, chilling, and utterly unambiguous. The Vespid, under the influence of their strain leader, Xylos, were not merely building structures. They were manipulating the very fabric of reality. The concept of unreality was now a tangible, terrifying fact. The Ethereal Council has convened, Xylos announced a communications specialist. A female Tau with wide, worried eyes. Ethereal Aunshi is on an encrypted channel, awaiting your report. Xylos Tausa clenched a gauntleted fist. Aunshi, a venerable and wise ethereal known for his progressive views and commitment to galactic expansion, would understand the gravity of this. The Tau Empire thrived on order, on the systematic application of science and reason. This was the antithesis of everything they stood for. He initiated the connection. The holographic image of Aunshi materialized before him, his serene face etched with a rare flicker of concern. Xylos Tausa, your report on XP-371 is deeply troubling. Explain this reality manipulation in terms our understanding can grasp. Honored Aunshi, Xylos began, projecting the Pathfinder data. The Vespid on XP 371, led by a unique strain leader designated Xylos, are constructing comb structures that actively warp local reality. They are manifesting resources, creating impossible defensive fields, and causing localized distortions in space, time, and even the fundamental properties of matter. Pathfinder Team 7. Witnessed trees dying and resurrecting in grotesque forms, rivers flowing in contradictory directions, and Vespid drones experiencing erratic shifts in gravity and temporal flow, yet continuing to build under Xylos's undeniable command. Aunchi's eyebrows, usually placid, furrowed. These are not merely advanced technological applications, not some form of grav manipulation or localized phase shifting. No, honored Aunchi. The energy signature is inconsistent with any known Tau or Xenos technology. It is chaotic, diffuse, yet focused through Xylos's communion organ. The data indicates a pervasive psychic resonance, a non-material energy source that fuels these distortions. It is fundamentally irrational. Shazo chose his words carefully, knowing the ethereal's aversion to anything that smacked of the unscientific or the superstitious. Aunchi was silent for a long moment, contemplating the horrifying images of the distorted world. This psychic resonance, the Imperium of man, speaks of such things. They attribute it to a realm of primal energies, a warp that spawns demons and madness. He uttered the word demon with a visible shudder of distaste. Their legends are indeed primitive, honored Aunchi, Shazo replied, though privately he felt a chilling sense of unease. The raw, unfiltered terror in the Pathfinder reports was difficult to dismiss. But the evidence before us points to a non-physical source of energy manipulation, one that defies our understanding of the universe. The Vespid are not merely using technology. They are harnessing chaos. The Ethereal Council, a collective of the wisest and most influential ethereals, had been brought into the conversation, their holographic images appearing around Aunchi. Their expressions ranged from deep concern to outright bewilderment. One, a younger ethereal named Aunvor, spoke with clear apprehension. To allow such a force to propagate within the Empire is unthinkable. It corrupts the very principles of the greater good. This colony must be purged, Shaso. The Vespid of XP 371 must be re-assimilated, forcibly if necessary, or the entire world rendered inert. This is a threat, not an opportunity. No, Aunvre, Aunchi interjected, his voice firm. The Vespid are valued allies. We do not destroy those who can be brought into the light of the greater good. This anomaly, while disturbing, could also represent a unique evolutionary path. Imagine if this power could be understood, quantified, and controlled for the benefit of the Empire. Instantaneous resource generation, impenetrable defenses. The possibilities are immense. Xylos felt a surge of professional duty and also a deep sense of foreboding. He respected Aonshi's vision, his unwavering commitment to the greater good, but he had seen the unadulterated madness on XP 371. Honored Aonshi, with respect, the Pathfinder reports indicate that the phenomena are entirely uncontrolled. Attempts to quantify or contain these energies could prove catastrophic. We are witnessing raw, unpredictable chaos, not a new technology. That is precisely why we must send a specialized delegation, Aonshi countered, his eyes burning with conviction. A team of our finest Earth-caste scientists, accompanied by skilled water-caste diplomats, and a protective detachment of fire-caste warriors. Their objective will be twofold. First, to establish communication with Xylos and understand the nature of these structures. Second, to integrate Xylos Prime into the Empire, harnessing this unique evolutionary path for the greater good. We must understand it before we condemn it. The debate among the ethereals was brief but intense. The pragmatic and conservative factions argued for isolation or eradication, citing the potential for galactic-scale instability. The progressive factions, led by Aonshi, argued for understanding and eventual integration, believing that no force was beyond the reach of Tao reason and the greater good. Ultimately, Aonshi's will, backed by his powerful position and persuasive arguments, prevailed. A specialized diplomatic and research delegation was swiftly assembled. It was a testament to the Tao's unwavering belief in their principles. Faced with an incomprehensible threat, their first instinct was to seek understanding, to extend the hand of diplomacy, to offer integration into the greater good. They would bring their vast scientific knowledge, their diplomatic prowess, and their unwavering conviction that all things could be understood and controlled for the common good. Xylos was ordered to lead the fire-caste escort for this delegation. He saluted, a profound sense of unease weighing heavily on him. He had witnessed the grim realities of the galaxy for many cycles, but never before had he faced something that fundamentally challenged the very foundations of his rational universe. He looked at the flickering image of XP 371, the vast, unnatural comb structures pulsing with their somewhat terrible power. He wondered if even the boundless optimism of the Tao Empire could truly hope to contain such a virulent, mind-bending chaos. The greater good had encountered many obstacles, but this was the first that threatened to shatter its very perception of reality. The stage was set for an encounter that would define, or perhaps utterly break, the Tao understanding of the cosmos. The diplomatic and research delegation from the Tao Empire approached Xylos Prime with a mix of cautious optimism and palpable apprehension. Their flagship, the Light of Expansion, was bristling with advanced sensor arrays, each designed to penetrate the veil of unreality that now shrouded the Vespid world. Shaso Tausa stood on the observation deck, watching the planetary display. The world below, once a vibrant green-blue jewel, now pulsed with a sickly, ethereal glow, its atmosphere visibly distorted, shimmering like heat haze over a vast, unseen fire. Our long-range atmospheric sampling drones are encountering severe navigational difficulties, Shaso, reported Porwi Mayen, the Watercast lead diplomat, his usually placid demeanor strained. Their internal chronometers are desynchronizing, and their structural integrity is being compromised by rapid, localized phase shifts. We've lost 3 drones already, simply vanishing or reappearing as twisted metal. Honored Miyen, that is why we proceed with extreme caution, Shaso replied, his voice calm, belying the unease he felt. His XV-8 battlesuit shimmered faintly under the deck's lights, a silent promise of overwhelming force should diplomacy fail. Maintain maximum shield projections and prepare defensive interceptors. These reality fluctuations are unpredictable. The core of the delegation consisted of 3 distinct castes, each representing a pillar of Tao society. The Water caste, led by Porwi Mien, were the diplomats, tasked with establishing contact and understanding Xylos's intentions. The Earth caste, under the brilliant but often naive guidance of Fiovre Catano, were the scientists, eager to dissect, analyze, and ultimately harness this incomprehensible power. And the Fire caste, led by Shaso Tausa himself, were the protectors, the guardians of the greater good, ready to defend the delegation with plasma and pulse fire. As the Light of Expansion entered high orbit, the scale of the distortions became horrifyingly clear. The vast, reality-warping comb structures now covered nearly a third of Xylos Prime's largest continent. They pulsed with an eerie, internal light, constantly shifting in form and color. Around them, the very sky seemed to tear and mend, showing brief, impossible glimpses of star fields that should not exist, or perhaps did not exist. Yet, clouds would sometimes flow backwards or coalesce into geometrically impossible shapes. The designated landing zone, carefully chosen by the pathfinders of Row 7, was near the edge of the most intense distortion fields, a relatively stable forest clearing kilometers from the central hive. Even here, the subtle effects were profound. As the dropships descended, the ground below seemed to ripple. Colors bled into each other, and the sounds of the engines sometimes echoed with impossible delays. Once on the surface, the Earthcast immediately deployed their portable analysis arrays. Fio Vricatano, his scientific zeal overriding his natural caution, practically sprinted to the nearest crystal chitin growth, his data slate whirring. Extraordinary. The crystalline lattice exhibits properties of self-reconfiguration. The chitinous fibers are undergoing rapid, localized quantum entanglement. This is not construction, Xylos. This is organic architecture interacting with fundamental physical laws. Porhui Mayen, meanwhile, focused on his primary objective, contact with Xylos. He sent out a series of highly modulated broad-spectrum comm bursts coded in the universal Vespid thought pulse language, a complex psychic hum that conveyed both information and intent. To the esteemed strain leader Xylos of Xylos Prime, this is Porhui Mayen of the Tau Empire. We come in peace, seeking understanding, and offering the boundless advantages of integration into the greater good. The response was not immediate. For long moments, the only reply was the low, pervasive thrum of the distorted reality around them, the unsettling hum of the impossible comb structures. Then, a single, powerful thought pulse emanated directly from the central, largest hive. It was not a language of logic or diplomacy, but a wave of pure, overwhelming will. It was a command, primitive and absolute, vibrating with a raw, undeniable power that reverberated in the very bones of the toe. It spoke of expansion, of growth, of a fundamental, unstoppable imperative to build, to warp, to consume. It feels like an impulse, Xylos, Porhui Mayen gasped, clutching his head. Not a message, but a biological drive. It is utterly focused on the structures. Suddenly, the ground around them rippled. A section of the forest floor, where a moment before there had been solid earth, now shifted into a patch of swirling, iridescent mist, through which impossible geometries briefly flickered. From the mist, emerging as if from nowhere, appeared a contingent of Vespid stingwings. Their forms shimmered, their wings beating with an unnerving, discordant hum, their plasma weapons glowing with an unnatural light. They were not attacking, merely observing, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the chaotic energy of their world. They are not hostile, Shaso, but they are not communicating either, Mayen reported, trying to maintain his diplomatic composure. They are merely waiting, observing us with a disquieting intensity. Fiovre Catano, utterly absorbed in his analysis, barely noticed the Vespid. Remarkable! The energetic signature of the Stingwing's plasma weapons is highly unstable. It shifts between stable plasma and an unknown energy signature, almost as if they are phasing in and out of coherent existence. If we could quantify this, we could revolutionize our weapons technology. His data slate whirred excitedly. Shas-O Ta'auza saw the danger. These Vespid were not just mutated. They were fundamentally changed. Their weapons were terrifyingly unpredictable, capable of anything from a standard plasma burst to an unpredictable reality tear. He looked at the vast, unsettling beauty of the comb structures, at the frantic, driven work of the Vespid drones, and at the unwavering, almost hypnotized focus of Xylos, hovering above the grandest structure. The diplomatic approach was failing. Xylos was not interested in communication or integration. It was a conduit, a living antenna for forces the To could barely perceive, let alone comprehend. Its purpose was now singular: to build, to expand the domain of unreality. Suddenly, the ethereal hum intensified. The air crackled with unseen energies. The stingwings before them, previously still, now twitched erratically, their forms briefly stretching and contracting. From the largest comb structure, an immense psychic wave erupted, raw and terrifying. It was a scream, a roar, a warning, and a promise. And within that scream, the Tau felt, for the first time, a profound sense of malevolence, a cold, calculating intelligence that was not Vespid, but something far, far older and infinitely more dangerous. Honored Mien, Fio Vricatano, Shas-O's voice cut through the air, sharp and urgent. Recall your personnel. Prepare for immediate withdrawal. This is no longer a diplomatic mission. We are standing on a precipice. Whatever is influencing Xylos, it is far beyond our understanding. This world is not merely unstable. It is actively hostile to rational thought. We cannot integrate this. We can only survive it. As the Tau scrambled for their dropships, the shadows cast by the impossible comb structures lengthened, twisting into grotesque, fleeting shapes. The air grew cold, and a distant, guttural growl seemed to emanate from the very heart of the largest hive. The toe had sought to bring the light of the greater good to Xylos Prime, but instead they had stumbled upon a world already claimed by an ancient darkness, a horror that now stirred and began to take notice of its new, unsuspecting visitors. The initial encounter was over, but the grim struggle was only just beginning. The scream was not physical. It was a psychic laceration, tearing through the minds of the Toe delegation, a cacophony of impossible colors and dissonant frequencies. It was a sound that scraped against the very essence of reason, a prelude to the unfolding horror. As the Earth-caste scientists and water-caste diplomats scrambled into their dropships, their faces pale with a terror alien to their scientific understanding, Shas-O Tausa directed his fire-caste warriors to establish a defensive perimeter. He saw it first, a ripple in the air, a shimmering distortion above the largest comb structure. It wasn't a conventional portal, not a clean tear in space-time. Instead, the very fabric of reality thinned and stretched, like wet paper being pulled taut, revealing glimpses of something utterly beyond comprehension. Through the iridescent membrane, impossible forms twisted and writhed. Vast, chitinous limbs covered in eyes that wept liquid stars, mouths lined with teeth that were not solid, but existed in multiple dimensions at once, and wings made of pure, screaming energy. Then the membrane pulsed, and from the nascent warp rift, a single, horrifying entity tore itself free. It was a demon of Tzench, a lord of change, though lesser than Xythar himself. Magnificent, grotesque creature of vibrant feathers and razor-sharp talons. Its head, a beaked monstrosity, swiveled, its multiple eyes fixing on the Toe dropships. It shrieked, a sound that hammered at the minds of the fire warriors, threatening to unhinge their sanity. Behind it, through the still, rippling veil, more horrors pressed, their forms indistinct, but their malevolent intent palpable. "Demons!" Shas-O Tausa roared, the word ripped from the classified archives of the Imperium, a term he had always dismissed as primitive superstition. Now, it was horrifyingly real. "Concentrate, pulse fire. Do not let them solidify." His fire warriors, trained to perfection, reacted instantly. Pulse rifle energy bolts, plasma blasts from crisis suits, and seeker missiles streaked towards the Lord of Change. But the demon, a creature of pure warp energy, was not easily harmed. The pulse bolts seemed to pass through its form, dissipating harmlessly, or striking it and causing its physical manifestation to flicker erratically before reforming. Plasma blasts, designed to melt plasteel, splattered against its hide with a sound like wet canvas, causing superficial damage that healed almost instantly as raw warp energy flowed into it from the nascent rift. The comb structures reacted to the demonic manifestation. Around the toe, the ground convulsed. Portions of the forest floor stretched, then snapped back, causing several fire warriors to stumble. A nearby ravine abruptly deepened by dozens of meters, then refilled with soil, burying one unfortunate pathfinder who hadn't managed to get clear. The stingwings, previously observers, now flew into a frenzied dance around the Lord of Change, their forms pulsing with the same chaotic energy that radiated from the demon. They were not fighting it. They were somehow attuned to it. Their reality-warping comb structures now drawing upon the raw energy of the warp rift. "Shaso, the Vespid are not attacking the demons," Kor-Ui, Real, cried out from his secured position within a dropship, his voice laced with panic. They're like conductors. Their structures are intensifying the rift. The strain leader, Xylos, it's directing the flow. Indeed, Xylos, still hovering high above the central hive, pulsed with an almost blinding light. Its communion organ, once merely a receiver, now seemed to be an active conduit, drawing the unholy energies from the warp rift and channeling them into the vast network of comb structures below. The bizarre architecture glowed with infernal light, and the distortions around them intensified, becoming a raging storm of impossible physics. From the rift, now expanding rapidly, poured forth a torrent of lesser demons, swirling horrors made of raw color and biting gibberish. Pink horrors splitting into blue horrors upon destruction, their gibbering shrieks driving fire warriors to the brink of madness. The Tau, though disciplined, were utterly unprepared for this. Their weapons, designed for the predictable physics of real space, were often useless against creatures that defied physical laws. A particularly large pink horror, a ball of multicolored malice, phased through a crisis suit's shield, its spectral claws tearing at the pilot's armor. Shas-O Ta'ausa, seeing the immediate threat, unleashed a volley of concentrated plasma from his suit's burst cannons, incinerating the demon. But before the pilot could recover, another horror shimmered into existence behind him, its laughter echoing mockingly. "Fall back. All units, fall back to the dropships," Shas-O commanded, his voice raw. This was not a battle they could win through conventional means. "Pathfinder team, Row 7. Lay down, covering fire. Get those dropships airborne. The Pathfinders, their rail rifles cracking, fired concentrated slugs that sometimes disrupted the demons' ephemeral forms, but never truly destroyed them. The Lord of Change, now fully solidified, stalked towards the toe positions, its talons tearing gaping wounds in the ground. Its eyes, twin pools of liquid madness, fixed on Xylos. It shrieked again, and the ground beneath Xylos' crisis suit buckled, sending him tumbling. For a moment, he felt his connection to his suit's internal chronometer falter, his perceptions elongating, time stretching into an agony of suspended animation before snapping back to normal. The daemon was toying with them. As the dropships roared to life, their engines struggling against the gravitational distortions, the stingwings began their true attack. Their plasma weapons, imbued with the warp's chaotic energies, fired bolts that were not merely superheated gas, but pure, distilled unreality. Some bolts merely passed through the dropship's shields, doing no damage. Others, however, would hit and cause a section of the dropship's hull to suddenly twist into impossible shapes, or briefly vanish, exposing the terrified crew within. One dropship's engines abruptly stopped responding, then violently accelerated, causing it to crash into a distorted mountainside, exploding in a ripple of corrupted fire. Xylos, struggling to regain his footing, realized the horrific truth. The Vespid were no longer allies. They were tools, pawns of something dark and ancient, their unique biology exploited to unravel reality. And the Tau, in their hubris, had blundered into a conflict that threatened to expose them to the very horrors they had so carefully dismissed as primitive myth. As the remaining dropships finally clawed their way into the sky, buffeted by the storm of reality warps, Xylos looked back at Xylos Prime. The planet was a scar, a wound in the fabric of the universe. The vast comb structures glowed with an infernal light, and above them, the warp rift churned, a maw opening wider and wider, spilling more horrors into real space. The demon prince, Lord Zythar, had found a new playground, and the toe had unknowingly laid out the welcome mat. The greater good had just encountered the greater chaos, and the experience was devastating. The retreat from Xylos Prime was a harrowing ordeal. The surviving Tau dropships, battered and scarred by reality-warping attacks, limped back to the light of expansion, their crews traumatized by the impossible horrors they had witnessed. Xylos stood on the bridge, his battlesuit armor scorched, his mind reeling from the encounter. He had seen demons, creatures of pure warp energy, manifestations of chaos and malevolence. Every logical principle, every scientific tenet he held dear, had been violated in the most brutal fashion imaginable. The loss of life was severe. Nearly a third of the fire-caste escort and a significant portion of the earth-caste scientists and water-caste diplomats had either been destroyed by the demonic incursions or consumed by the reality fluctuations. Those who returned were shaken, their minds struggling to reconcile their empirical understanding with the raw, terrifying power of the warp. Some of the Earth caste, once eager to quantify and control, now spoke in disjointed whispers of impossible geometries and bleeding colors, their analytical minds fractured. Chasso, what we faced. It was not a Xylos technology, Porui Emiyen reported, his face pale, his composure shattered. It was malevolence, a predatory intelligence that revels in chaos. The Vespid leader, Xylos, it is merely a puppet, an unwitting conduit for something ancient and unspeakable. Fiovre Catano, once the epitome of scientific zeal, was now a shell of his former self. He sat hunched over a data slate, muttering about non-Euclidean causality and entropic feedback loops, his eyes wide with a terror that no amount of data could assuage. He had seen the universe unravel, and the sight had broken him. Chasso Tausa ordered the fleet to establish a strict quarantine perimeter around Xylos Prime, declaring the entire system a hazard zone, an interdicted region of space. No ship was to approach. No colony was to be founded. No resources were to be extracted. The Tao Empire, in its logical wisdom, had never encountered a force so utterly beyond its comprehension, so fundamentally irrational, that its only recourse was complete isolation. But the ordeal on Xylos Prime had inadvertently yielded something else, something hidden amidst the terror and confusion. During the desperate retreat, one of the Earth caste's advanced reality sampling drones, thought lost, had managed to transmit a final, highly corrupted data burst before its destruction. Fiovre Catano, in his fragmented state, had been the only one to notice a peculiar, repeating pattern within the noise. "Chasso," he rasped, his voice barely audible, clutching his data slate like a lifeline. The fluctuations, they are not entirely random. Within the chaos, there is a pulse, a frequency. It's a counter-resonance. Chasso, though exhausted, leaned in, intrigued. "Explain, Fiovre." The daemon, it was manifesting, using the Vespid structures, yes? Catano said, his eyes darting wildly. But the structures themselves, they were also resisting, or trying to. There's a faint, underlying waveform in the energy signature, a kind of null point. It's trying to reweave, like a broken tapestry trying to mend itself. It was a desperate glimmer of hope in an otherwise suffocating darkness. The drone, caught in the heart of the burgeoning warp rift, had detected a faint, almost imperceptible countercurrent within the torrent of chaotic energies. It was a resonance emanating from deep within the core of Xylos Prime itself, amplified and diffused by the initial, less corrupted comb structures built by Xylos. This was a natural phenomenon of the planet, a subtle geological anomaly that resonated with a frequency inimical to warp energies, a geological harmonic that provided a minuscule yet persistent resistance. The Vespid, in their initial construction phase, before Zasithar's profound corruption of Xylos, had unknowingly tapped into this planet-wide null frequency. Their early structures, driven by Xylos's initial, less corrupted whispers, had actually amplified this natural counter-resonance, creating pockets of localized stability within the nascent distortions. It was only later, when the demon prince intensified its influence, that Xylos's directives had twisted, pushing the architecture into patterns that facilitated the warp incursions, rather than resisting them. A null point, Chassot murmured, his mind racing. A natural resistance to these psychic energies? Yes, yes, Chassot, Catano exclaimed, a flicker of his old scientific brilliance returning to his eyes. It's like an interference pattern. The planet has its own song, and the daemon's song is dissonant to it. If we could find a way to amplify the planet's natural frequency, to provide a feedback loop. The thought was audacious, terrifying, and perhaps utterly insane. But in the face of the unquantifiable horror they had just witnessed, it was the only slender thread of hope they had. If there was a way to counter the warp, to stabilize reality, it lay not in their advanced weaponry, but in the planet itself, and perhaps in a controlled understanding of the very structures that had nearly consumed them. Chassot Taosa knew the risks. Returning to Xylos Prime would be an act of utter desperation, a gamble of unprecedented proportions. But to leave the planet to be consumed by Tsenchayan madness, to allow a warp rift to fester unchecked in a region of space adjacent to the Tao Empire, was an even graver threat. It would be a cancerous growth, capable of spreading its unreality throughout their peaceful domains. He called an emergency meeting of the surviving commanders and ethereals. Honored Aunshi, our retreat was a strategic imperative, but our mission is not over. We have discovered a potential weakness in the warp's manifestation on Xylos Prime. The planet itself possesses a natural counter-frequency, a null resonance that could be amplified to destabilize the demonic incursions. Aunshi, still reeling from the devastating report and the loss of so many of his trusted personnel, listened intently. A counter-frequency? You speak of harnessing this chaos against itself? In essence, honored Aunshi, yes, Shaso confirmed. Fio Vracatano postulates that if we can create a focused resonance amplifier using modified Vespid architecture, perhaps, we could exploit this null point and weaken the demon's hold. It would require returning to the surface, and it would be incredibly dangerous. But it offers a chance, however slim, to turn the tide. The debate that followed was even more impassioned than the first. Many argued for the Toe way, retreat, quarantine, and study from afar. But the memory of the demons, the raw, unquantifiable terror, and the devastating impact on Toe morale weighed heavily. To simply abandon Xylos Prime was to concede defeat to a force they could not understand, a philosophical capitulation that gnawed at the very heart of the greater good. Ultimately, it was Aunshi who cast the deciding vote. We do not shy from challenges, even those beyond our immediate comprehension. If there is a chance to stem this tide, to protect the innocent Vespid from this corruption, and to learn how to defend ourselves against such horrors, then we must take it. Shazo Tawaza, you will lead this mission. Reassemble a strike force. Prepare to return to Xylos Prime. This time, we do not seek to integrate. We seek to sever the tendrils of chaos that bind this world. A new mission was forged from the ashes of disaster. A grim, desperate plan to fight fire with unreality. The Toe, ever adaptable, were preparing to face a foe that mocked their every principle, armed with a theoretical understanding gleaned from the edge of madness itself. Xylos Prime, a world claimed by chaos, held a secret to its own salvation, and the Toe were now forced to delve deeper into the abyss to find it. Xylos Prime had become a grotesque mockery of a world, a festering wound in the fabric of real space. The colossal comb structures now covered nearly half of the primary continent, their chitinous surfaces pulsating with an infernal, internal light. The air was a constant shimmer of impossible phenomena. Colors bled into one another Sounds echoed from nowhere, and gravity fluctuated with nauseating regularity. The warp rift, once a mere tear, had grown into a gaping maw above the central hive, a swirling vortex of raw, unholy energy, occasionally spitting out fully formed demons that shrieked and capered across the warped landscape. Under the unwavering, intensified psychic commands of Xylos, the Vespid colony worked with a terrifying, mindless efficiency. The Strain leader, now utterly enthralled by the demon prince Zythar's insidious influence, perceived the burgeoning chaos not as destruction, but as ultimate creation, a higher form of existence. Its communion organ throbbed, no longer merely receiving whispers, but actively broadcasting Zythar's will, amplified and distorted through its alien biology. The Vespid were building not merely architecture, but a vast, living engine designed to pull Xylos Prime fully into the immaterium, to transform it into a Zentchian daemon world. Shas-o Tausa stood on the bridge of the Light of Expansion, his new strike force assembled. The ship hung in high orbit, its advanced Auspex arrays struggling to penetrate the escalating distortions. Fiovre Catano, though still mentally scarred, had found a grim purpose in his work. He had designed a series of resonance amplifiers based on the Vespid's own crystalline chitin architecture, but tuned to the planet's natural null frequency. "The window is closing, Shaso," Catano reported, his voice devoid of its former scientific enthusiasm, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. "The warp rift is approaching a critical mass. Within 3 standard cycles, Xylos Prime will be irrevocably lost, its material form consumed by the immaterium. Our devices, the null frequency emitters, must be deployed within the heart of the largest comb structures near Xylos itself, to have any chance of amplifying the planet's counter-resonance. The daemon presence is dense, Shaso," added Corwee Reel, his battle-hardened face grim. "Lord of Change activity confirmed near the central hive. Lesser daemons swarm the periphery. And the Vespid stingwings, they are more aggressive, their attacks more unpredictable due to the warp energies coursing through them." Shaso Tausa nodded, his resolve hardened by the memory of the horrors he had witnessed. "This is a mission of absolute necessity. Failure is not an option. We are fighting to preserve not just a world, but the very integrity of our understanding of the universe. We fight for the greater good, against a foe that seeks to unravel all order." The strike force deployed. 3 Manta dropships, heavily shielded and bristling with enhanced weaponry, descended through the roiling atmosphere. Each carried a specialized team: Earth-cast engineers for deployment, fire-cast warriors for defense, and a small, elite cadre of pathfinders for reconnaissance. Xylos Taosa led the main assault. His personal XV-86 Cold Star battlesuit, equipped with experimental targeting systems designed to lock on to the demons' ephemeral forms. As they dropped through the clouds, the scale of the unraveling was sickening. Entire mountain ranges pulsed with an internal light, their peaks twisting into impossible spirals. Rivers flowed upwards, defying gravity, before coalescing into shimmering, liquid spheres that hung in the air. The cries of mutated local fauna, distorted into agonized shrieks, echoed through the fractured landscape. The first major engagement was immediate. As the drop ships neared their target zones, swarms of Vespid stingwings, their forms now iridescent with warp energy, screamed towards them. Their plasma weapons fired bolts of pure, chaotic energy, some passing harmlessly, others striking the shields and causing localized reality warps that threatened to tear the dropships apart. Maintain formation. Focus fire on the stingwings. Do not engage the demons unless they are a direct threat to the deployment, Xylos ordered, his voice echoing in the comms. His Cold Star suit weaved through the chaotic airspace, pulse carbines spitting bolts of superheated energy, incinerating Vespid drones in bright flashes. They suffered losses. One manta, caught in a particularly violent temporal dilation field, simply froze in mid-air, its engines silent, its crew trapped in an agonizingly slow moment of existence before being torn apart by a horde of blue horrors that shimmered into being around it. The sight was a grim reminder of the stakes. The remaining two mantas managed to breach the outer defensive perimeter of the central hive and deploy their teams. Xylos Taosa's team landed in a colossal plaza of twisted chitin and shimmering crystal, surrounded by towering, spire-like comb structures that pulsed with raw psychic energy. The ground beneath them felt like a living thing, subtly shifting and rippling. Immediately, they were assaulted. Pink horrors, their forms a riot of colors, gibbered and clawed at their shields. Screamers of Tzench, ray-like demons with razor-sharp wings, streaked through the air, their passes causing temporal distortions that blurred the fire warrior's vision. And amidst the chaos, the lesser demons, their shapes fluid and terrifying, pressed the attack. Fio Vrikatano, prioritize emplacement. My fire warriors will hold this line, Xylos yelled, unleashing a volley of plasma bursts that obliterated a cluster of horrors. His experimental targeting system locked onto the ethereal forms, allowing his weapons to inflict tangible damage, forcing the demons to reform rather than simply shimmer through his attacks. Caetano and his Earthcast engineers, protected by a phalanx of fire warriors, worked with desperate speed. They hauled the heavy crystal chitin resonance emitters into position, each device a masterpiece of reverse-engineered Vespid architecture, painstakingly retuned to the planet's natural counter-frequency. They slotted the devices into the existing comb structures, connecting them to the vast, interwoven network that Xylos had created. As the first emitter powered up, a low, resonant hum emanated from it, a pure, unwavering tone that cut through the cacophony of warp energies. The demons recoiled, their forms flickering, their shrieks turning to howls of pain. The sting wings, caught in the wave, stumbled in the air, their iridescent glow momentarily dimming. The very air around the emitter seemed to stabilize, the colors solidifying, the temporal distortions briefly ceasing. It was a minuscule island of order in a sea of chaos. But the Daemon Prince Zythar would not yield its prize so easily. From the central hive, a furious psychic shriek ripped through the air, directly from Xylos. The strain leader, now a beacon of raw, untamed warp energy, directed its maddened colony. More sting wings poured from the hive, their plasma weapons now firing in a relentless barrage of unreality, targeting the toe with renewed ferocity. Simultaneously, the warp rift above them pulsed, and the Lord of Change, its magnificent form wreathed in warp fire, descended, its many eyes burning with fury. It had sensed the counter-resonance, and it would not allow its new domain to be snatched away. The long war for Xylos Prime had truly begun, and the Toe were fighting on the knife edge of annihilation. In the swirling maelstrom of Xylos Prime, where reality itself groaned under the assault of the warp, a new figure emerged as the central pillar of the Tau resistance, Shaso Tauza. Clad in his gleaming Bexty-86 Cold Star battlesuit, a beacon of determination amidst the encroaching madness, he moved with a precision and ferocity that belied the terror he felt. His mind, once so reliant on logic, was now forced to adapt, to anticipate the unpredictable, to fight a war where the enemy defied all known laws of physics. The pressure on the Toe was immense. Demons poured from the warp rift in an unending tide, their chaotic forms a bewildering array of claws, teeth, and impossible energies. Screamers zipped through the air, leaving trails of temporal distortion, while horrors giggled and shrieked as they exploded into smaller, equally maddening entities. Compounding this, the Vespid stingwings, once allies, now fought with a fanatical zeal, their plasma weapons unleashing unpredictable bursts of reality-twisting energy that could shear through armor or simply cause a warrior's weapons to cease functioning for a critical second. Xylos was everywhere at once. His cold star suit, typically used for rapid flanking maneuvers, was now a dynamic shield, intercepting demonic charges, unleashing focused plasma bursts that, thanks to Fiovre Catano's experimental targeting systems, found purchase on the ethereal forms. He spun, dodged, and fired, his multi-tracker painting targets in a blur of combat efficiency. His battlesuit's thrusters flared, propelling him over chasms that suddenly opened in the ground, or through swarms of stingwings whose attacks shimmered past him, leaving behind only the metallic tang of ozone. His focus, however, was not just on fighting. It was on leading. "Hold the line! Protect the Earth, Cast!" He roared over the comms, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. "Maintain pulse fire discipline. Aim for critical points. Don't let them consolidate." He watched as his fire warriors, each a master of their craft, struggled against the nightmare. They fought with grim determination, their training pushed to its absolute limits. Crute mercenaries, integrated into the Tau forces, their instincts keen and their ferocity unmatched, tore into lesser demons with their ritual blades, their bodies absorbing the essence of the fallen foes, granting them fleeting resilience against the warp's touch. Shapers, their leaders, directed their kin with guttural cries, their ancient, primal understanding of battle proving surprisingly effective against the unbound chaos. Yet, despite their valiant efforts, the Tau were suffering. A hammerhead gunship, providing covering fire, found its railgun mounts twisting into grotesque, non-functional shapes as a swarm of stingwings unleashed a reality-warping volley. It plummeted, a flaming wreck, into a cluster of comb structures, its explosion rippling outwards in a wave of distorted light. Fire warriors, caught off guard by sudden shifts in gravity, were slammed into the ground, their armor cracking. Many simply vanished as localized reality tears consumed them, leaving behind only the echoes of their final, silent screams. Xylos felt the immense burden of command, the weight of every lost life. He understood, with a chilling clarity, that this was a war for their very souls, a conflict that threatened to dismantle their carefully constructed, rational universe. He saw the doubt, the confusion, and the nascent terror in the eyes of his warriors, even through their helmets. This was not a fight against a predictable foe. It was a battle against the impossible, against the very fabric of reality unraveling around them. His personal journey was one of profound reevaluation. The Toe belief in the inherent superiority of scientific understanding had been shattered on Xylos Prime. The warp, the demons, the raw, unquantifiable madness. These were not primitive superstitions. They were terrifyingly real. And in facing them, Xylos found himself relying not just on tactical acumen and technological superiority, but on an almost instinctual sense of survival. A primal will to resist the encroaching madness. He pushed himself beyond all limits, his cold star suit a blur of motion, his every action a testament to his unwavering commitment to the greater good, even as the greater good seemed to be fracturing around him. He spotted Fiovre Catano, protected by a stubborn knot of fire warriors, frantically trying to deploy the last of the null frequency emitters. A lord of change, its magnificent wings beating with infernal power, descended upon them, its beaked head cocked, its multiple eyes assessing the Taw with mocking amusement. The demon prince, Zythar, lurking in the warp, was allowing its minions to play, confident of victory. "Caetano, get clear!" Xylos screamed, boosting towards the Earthcast team. He unleashed a barrage of fusion blaster fire at the Lord of Change. The superheated plasma lanced out, striking the demon's ethereal form. It flickered, shrieked in outrage, and was forced to recoil, its attention diverted from Caetano. This momentary reprieve allowed Caetano to secure the final emitter. With a surge of power, the last device pulsed to life, its resonant hum joining the others. The collective counter-frequency, amplified by the interconnected comb structures, began to assert itself. The chaotic energy around the Tau positions wavered, the demons' forms flickering with increased instability. The sting wings, caught in the conflicting frequencies, began to behave erratically, some falling from the sky, their warp-imbued plasma weapons fizzling out. But the demon prince Zythar was not defeated. Enraged by this unexpected resistance, it poured even more of its malevolent will into Xylos. The strain leader, already a conduit for chaos, became a conduit for pure, unadulterated fury. From the central hive, a psychic scream of monumental proportions erupted, washing over the planet. The comb structures, responding to Xylos's amplified commands, began to writhe and contort with renewed ferocity, as if trying to rip themselves free from the planet's counter-resonance. The warp rift above Xylos Prime pulsed violently, expanding further, threatening to engulf the entire system. Demons, infused with a new surge of power, redoubled their assault. Xylos knew that this was the climax. The planet's natural resistance, amplified by Catano's emitters, was pushing back against the warp. But Zithar was now directly intervening, pouring its boundless energy into its Vespid puppet. It was a tug of war for the fate of a world. And the Tau were caught in the middle, tiny figures fighting against cosmic forces that threatened to crush them utterly. The burden on Shaso Tausa was immense. He was the fulcrum upon which the fate of Xylos Prime, and perhaps a piece of the Tau soul, now rested. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that this fight would demand more than just tactical brilliance. It would demand a sacrifice of unimaginable scale. The symphony of madness that was Xylos Prime intensified to an unbearable crescendo. The ground bucked and spasmed, great fissures tearing open to reveal glowing, impossibly deep chasms that pulsed with raw warp energy. The comb structures, responding to the demon prince Zithar's furious will, contorted into even more grotesque forms, their crystalline facets bleeding iridescent light, their chitinous curves twisting like living things in agony. Above them, the warp rift, now a swirling vortex miles across, devoured the sky, spilling torrents of demonic entities into the material realm. The air shrieked, rent by the cacophony of daemons, the cries of maddened Vespid, and the strained hum of the Tau's technology struggling against the unreality. The null frequency emitters, though powerful, were being overwhelmed. Fio Avracatano, his face etched with strain, watched his readouts plunge into chaotic oscillations. Shaso, the resonance field, is collapsing. Xylos is pushing back with immense power. The demon is channeling its will directly through the strain leader. We can't hold it. Shaso Tausa saw the truth of it. His fire warriors, though fighting with unwavering courage, were being annihilated. A particularly massive wave of horrors, infused with heightened warp energy, slammed into one of his defensive positions, dissolving fire warriors in bursts of corrupting light, their screams cut short as their very existence was unraveled. Kroot warriors, despite their Drunvage resilience, found their flesh mutating, twisting into useless forms as they tried to consume the essence of the stronger demons. The sting wings, now radiating pure, focused malice, darted through the maelstrom, their reality-warping blasts tearing holes in the Tau lines. The Lord of Change, Zithar's chief lieutenant on the planet, descended with a shriek of triumph. Its enormous talons, wreathed in warp flame, slammed into a cluster of Earth-caste engineers, rending them and their equipment into unrecognizable smears of matter and light. It then turned its beaked head towards Fiovre Catano, its many eyes burning with cold, predatory intelligence. "No!" Shazo Tausa roared, his cold star suit's fusion blasters roaring to life. He poured every ounce of his suit's power into a concentrated volley, striking the Lord of Change's chest. The demon shrieked, its form flickering violently, but it merely recoiled, its attention fixed on the Earth-cast engineer. "Caetano, fall back! Get clear!" Shaso commanded, pushing his suit beyond its limits, boosting towards the demon. But before he could reach him, the Lord of Change lashed out, its talons tearing a devastating gouge through Caetano's protective shield and into his chest. The Earth-cast scientist collapsed, his data slate tumbling from his grasp, his lifeblood spilling onto the warped ground. The loss of Caetano, the mind behind their only hope, was a hammer blow. Shaso Tawasa felt a surge of cold fury, a emotion rarely indulged by the Tau, but in this moment, utterly consuming. He unleashed a full broadside of plasma and missile fire at the Lord of Change, driving it back with sheer, desperate force. But it was too late. Caetano was gone, and with him, their last chance to manually reinforce the null frequency field. The warp rift continued to expand, its tendrils reaching out towards the light of expansion in orbit. The ship's shields flickered, unable to fully repel the raw, psychic assault. On the surface, the remaining Tau forces were being pushed back, their line crumbling under the relentless demonic and vespid assault. Retreat was imminent, but retreat now meant surrendering Xylos Prime entirely to the warp, leaving a festering wound at the heart of the Tau-controlled void. Shaso. Tausa looked up at Xylos, hovering above the central hive, a grotesque, glowing silhouette against the churning warp rift. The strain leader was the nexus, the amplifier, the key. If Xylos could be neutralized, if its communion organ, now a beacon for Zythar's power, could be severed, then perhaps the planet's natural null frequency could reassert itself, even without Caetano's emitters. But reaching Xylos meant penetrating the very heart of the chaos, confronting the demon prince's direct influence. It was a suicide mission. Yet, a cold resolve settled in Shazo's mind. There was no other choice. The greater good demanded sacrifice. He would not allow this world to be lost, not if there was a single, desperate chance to fight back. He had faced countless enemies, but this was different. This was a battle for the soul of their empirical understanding. A fight to prove that even against the greatest chaos, order and will could prevail. All remaining forces, establish a defensive perimeter around the dropship landing zone 2. Prepare for extraction. Xylos' voice, though strained, was firm. Corwi Real, assume command of the ground forces. Protect the evacuating personnel. Xylos, what are you doing? You're not evacuating, Real cried, sensing his commander's intent. I am going to Xylos, Xylos stated, his voice devoid of emotion. A warrior embracing his grim fate. If this world is to be saved, the source of its corruption must be severed. The Daemon Prince channels its power through the strain leader. Cut the head, and the body may yet fall. He boosted his Cold Star suit, its thrusters flaring with renewed power. He moved with a singular, desperate purpose, a lone spearhead against an ocean of madness. Demons shrieked and swarmed. Vespid sting wings fired their reality-twisting plasma, but Xylos Tausa plunged directly towards the heart of the central hive, towards Xylos. He knew he would not survive. But if his sacrifice could sever the demon's hold, if it could buy Xylos Prime a fleeting moment of respite, then it would be a price he was willing to pay. This was the darkest hour, and in it, a true hero of the Tau, though facing an enemy that transcended all understanding, chose to walk into the fire, a desperate, solitary flame against the endless night. The final, desperate charge of Xylos Tausa was a suicidal act of defiance, a single point of order piercing the heart of cosmic chaos. His Cold Star battlesuit, a blur of motion against the backdrop of the churning warp rift and the impossibly twisting comb structures, streaked towards the central hive. He was abandoning all strategic doctrine, all hope of survival, driven by a singular, consuming purpose: to sever the connection between the demon prince Zythar and its puppet, strain leader Xylos. Daemons swarmed, sensing his intent. Pink horrors exploded in his path. Blue horrors cackled as their smaller forms tried to cling to his suit, their spiritual claws raking against his shields. Screamers of Tzench darted around him, their high-pitched screeches threatening to overload his auditory sensors. Vespid sting wings, their forms now almost fully infused with warp energy, launched themselves at him in a suicidal frenzy. Their reality-warping plasma bursts hammering his shields, causing momentary disorientations, flashes of impossible landscapes, and agonizing temporal shifts. Xylos, however, was beyond fear. He had seen the Tau way crumble before the warp, witnessed his comrades unraveled into madness and unreality. His path was now clear. his resolve absolute. He unleashed a furious torrent of fusion, blaster fire, plasma blasts, and concentrated missile salvos, tearing through the demonic hordes. His experimental targeting systems, though struggling against the pervasive reality shifts, allowed him to inflict tangible damage, forcing the demons to dissipate and reform, buying him precious seconds. He reached the base of the central hive, a colossal structure that pulsed with the collective, corrupted will of Xylos and Zythar. Its chitinous walls writhed, and from gaping maw-like openings, more sting wings poured forth, a living tide of madness. Xylos landed, his thrusters roaring, and then, with a primal scream that tore through his comms and shocked his surviving forces, he unleashed his battlesuit's full close combat capability. His armored gauntlets, reinforced with monomolecular blades, tore through stingwings, rending their warp-infused forms into smoking ruin. He punched through the hive's living walls, ignoring the psychic backlash, his only goal, the strain leader at its heart. Inside, the horror intensified. The hive was a labyrinth of shifting passages, its internal geometry constantly reconfiguring. What was solid one moment was ethereal the next. Gravity became a cruel joke, pulling him sideways, upwards, then plunging him downwards into glowing, crystalline caverns. The whispers of the warp were deafening here, raw thought and emotion assaulting his mind, threatening to tear it apart. He saw visions, kaleidoscopic nightmares, promises of impossible knowledge, and the mocking, multi-eyed form of Zythar, its tendrils of influence thickest here. But Xylos pushed through. He navigated the impossible corridors with a grim, almost animalistic instinct. His training, his discipline, and his sheer, unyielding will forming a bulwark against the mind-shattering chaos. He located Xylos by the sheer intensity of its psychic output, a pulsating beacon of corrupted power deep within the hive's core. Xylos hovered in a wet, cathedral-like chamber, its walls pulsing with a blinding, infernal light. The strain leader was no longer merely a vespid. Its iridescent wings had grown larger, adorned with patterns that writhed and shifted, its chitin armored with intricate, impossible filigree. Its communion organ, now a swollen, glowing node, pulsed with raw warp energy, acting as a direct conduit for Zythar's malicious will. Around it, hundreds of vespid drones, equally twisted and corrupted, hovered in silent, motionless devotion, their forms shimmering. As Xylos burst into the chamber, Xylos reacted. A wave of pure, concentrated psychic force slammed into his battlesuit, designed to tear his mind apart. He stumbled, his internal systems screaming in protest, his vision blurring with impossible colors. But he held firm. He knew this was not Xylos's true will, but the demon prince's. "You will not claim this world," Xylos screamed, his voice raw, fueled by the fury of his fallen comrades and the shattered innocence of his caste. He ignited his fusion blasters, their muzzles glowing with intense heat, and unleashed their full fury at Xylos's glowing communion organ. The blast was blinding. Superheated plasma, concentrated to an unprecedented degree, lanced out, striking the glowing node. Xylos shrieked, a sound that was both vespid and something else entirely. A cry of profound agony and outrage. The communion organ, the nexus of Xylos' power, exploded in a shower of warp energy and chitinous fragments. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The psychic connection between Xylos and Zythar was violently severed. The strain leader, its central processing unit annihilated, its unique biology overloading, spasmed in the air, its body briefly expanding to impossible dimensions, then collapsing into a shower of crystalline dust and scorched chitin. The vespid drones around it, suddenly devoid of their guiding will, fell from the air like dead leaves, their warp-infused forms flickering and then vanishing entirely. But the severing came at a terrible cost. The destruction of Xylos, the planet's primary conduit for the Daemon Prince's power, created a massive psychic shockwave, an uncontrolled release of pent-up warp energy. The entire central hive convulsed violently. Reality tore apart. Xylos Tausa found himself caught in the epicenter of the explosion, his suit screaming in protest as gravitational forces pulled him in multiple directions at once, as temporal distortions stretched and compressed his very being. The walls of the chamber liquefied, then crystallized, then dissolved into pure light. He saw, for a fleeting, agonizing second, the boundless, horrifying visage of Zythar itself, its myriad eyes burning with fury and thwarted ambition, before he was consumed by the maelstrom. Above Xylos Prime, the warp rift, deprived of its primary anchor, began to convulse erratically. The torrent of demons lessened, then stopped entirely. The Lord of Change, its psychic connection to Zythar, momentarily severed, shrieked in confusion and rage, its form flickering as it struggled to maintain its manifestation in real space. The lesser demons, deprived of their guiding purpose, began to dissipate, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The planet's natural null frequency, no longer suppressed and corrupted by Xylos, began to assert itself. The emitters, though damaged, picked up the rising counter-resonance, amplifying it. The storm of reality warps began to subside, the impossible geometries flickering and then receding. Order, however fragile, was beginning to return to Xylos Prime, at the cost of a hero's ultimate sacrifice. Shazo Tausa was gone, consumed by the very chaos he had sought to defeat. But his desperate act had averted an even greater disaster. The silence that followed the cataclysmic destruction of Xylos was absolute, a profound stillness that was more terrifying than the preceding cacophony. The warp rift above Xylos Prime, though still present, had shrunk dramatically, becoming a mere swirling nebula of faint, chaotic energy rather than a gaping maw. No new demons spewed forth. The existing daemons, cut off from Zythar's direct influence and assaulted by the planet's rapidly reasserting null frequency, flickered violently, their forms dissolving and reforming in increasingly desperate attempts to maintain their hold on real space. The Lord of Change, its magnificent plumage singed by the psychic backlash, screamed in impotent rage before its form finally shimmered into nothingness, banished back to the immaterium. On the surface, Kor-Ui Real, now leading the shattered remains of the Tau ground forces, watched in stunned silence. The reality warps were subsiding. The ground beneath their feet, though still visibly scarred and warped, no longer writhed with impossible motions. The colors of the landscape, though muted and tinged with an unnatural gray, ceased their frenzied bleeding. The oppressive aura of madness began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion and loss. Shaso, he did it, Kor-Ui Real whispered, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on the smoking, imploded ruins of the central hive. There was no sign of the Cold Star battlesuit, no trace of his commander. Shas-O Ta'ausa was gone, consumed entirely by the chaotic energy release. The surviving Vespid drones, those not caught in the immediate psychic implosion, now moved with a disconcerting aimlessness. Their collective will, once bound by Xylos, was shattered. They hovered, listlessly, bumping into each other, their multifaceted eyes blank, their mandibles clicking without purpose. Their warp-infused glow faded, their forms returning to their natural, duller chitin. They were an automaton army suddenly devoid of command, adrift in a world they had helped warp beyond recognition. The Earth-cast engineers, though devastated by the loss of Fiovre Catano, now rallied, They activated their remaining null frequency emitters, carefully calibrating them to the planet's natural counter-resonance. With Xylos's corrupted influence gone, and the warp rift significantly diminished, these devices could now fully amplify the planet's innate stability. A soft, steady hum began to emanate from the emplaced emitters, a harmonious vibration that resonated through the very stones of Xylos Prime, pushing back against the lingering corruption. Slowly, painfully, the planet began to mend itself. The impossible geometries of the comb structures, deprived of the warp energy that sustained them, began to crumble, their unnatural curves cracking, their shimmering crystals dulling. Twisted trees, birthed from the chaos, withered and turned to dust, replaced by the slow, natural regrowth of resilient flora. The rivers, though still flowing through a scarred landscape, settled into their banks. The pervasive metallic tang in the air slowly dissipated, replaced by the faint scent of ozone and cooling earth. The light of expansion, still in orbit, registered the dramatic shift. "Honored Aunshi," the communications specialist reported, her voice trembling with relief. "The warp rift is stabilizing. Its energy signature is dropping below critical levels. Surface reality fluctuations are subsiding. It appears the daemon has been banished." Aunshi, who had watched the battle unfold with grim resolution, closed his eyes. "And Shazo Tausa?" A long, agonizing silence. Then, "No trace, honored Aunshi. His last known coordinates were at the epicenter of the psychic release. All telemetry is lost." Aunshi nodded slowly, a profound sorrow etched on his face. "He has entered the greater good, a true hero of the Empire. His sacrifice will be remembered." The Toe forces on the surface began their grim task of cleanup and evaluation. The world was utterly changed. Vast swaths of it were a barren wasteland, littered with the decaying remains of the reality-warped comb structures and the shattered forms of Vespid drones. The surviving Vespid, a fraction of the original colony, were now utterly disoriented, their communal mind fractured and leaderless. They were no longer a cohesive force, merely scattered individuals, lost in the ruins of their own making. The null frequency emitters, working in tandem with the planet's natural energies, continued their work. The smaller, less corrupted Vespid comb structures that formed the basic housing and resource collection nodes began to stabilize, their functions returning to normal, albeit without the strange, warp-imbued efficiency they had once possessed. The greater, more elaborate structures, however, continued to crumble, their foundations in unreality collapsing. Kor-Ui, Real, ordered the collection of all data recorders, all logs, all personal reflections from the surviving members of the delegation. He knew that what they had witnessed, what they had fought, would change the Tao Empire forever. Their logical, empirical worldview had been shattered, and they had been forced to confront a reality that defied all reason. The concept of the warp, of demons, of forces beyond their scientific comprehension, could no longer be dismissed as primitive superstition. It was real, it was dangerous, and it had nearly consumed one of their worlds. The aftermath was not a victory celebration. It was a somber, devastating reckoning. They had saved Xylos Prime from becoming a demon world, but the cost was immense. The loss of countless lives, the psychic trauma inflicted on their personnel, the shattering of their scientific certainties, and the ultimate sacrifice of Shas-O Taosa, a commander who had faced the impossible and paid the ultimate price. The Tao had averted one disaster, but they were left with a profound, terrifying knowledge that would haunt them for cycles to come. The Tao Empire, though resilient and ever forward-looking, was irrevocably changed by the crucible of Xylos Prime. The planet itself, a battle-scarred husk of its former self, became a grim monument to the catastrophic encounter with the warp. Its once verdant surface was now a patchwork of scarred wasteland and slow, painstaking regrowth, forever bearing the marks of reality's violent unraveling. The colossal, reality-warping comb structures largely crumbled, their foundations in unreality unable to sustain themselves without Xylos's corrupted will and Zythar's direct influence. Only the most basic, utilitarian Vespid structures remained, their crystalline chitin forms now dull and devoid of any strange glow. The surviving Vespid of Xylos Prime were a broken colony. Leaderless, their unique strain leader. Xylos, utterly annihilated, their collective consciousness drifted aimlessly. The profound trauma of their enslavement to Zythar and the subsequent violent severance of that connection had left them mentally scarred. Their communion organs, once vibrant and powerful, now pulsed faintly, receiving only fractured, incoherent echoes. The Tao, in their benevolence, attempted to integrate them anew, to guide them back to their standard development. But the Vespid of Xylos Prime never fully recovered. Their instinct for plasma weaponry was diminished, their communal intelligence fragmented, and their flight patterns often erratic, as if perpetually seeking a command that would never come. They became a melancholy, passive race, forever watched and studied by the Tao, a cautionary tale made flesh. The daemon prince Zythar, though banished, was far from defeated. It merely withdrew its influence, its vast intellect already charting new schemes, new worlds to corrupt. The banishment of a Lord of Change was but a temporary setback for a creature of Tzeentch. Xylos Prime had been an interesting experiment, a delightful foray into the minds of the unenlightened. The Tau, in their pathetic struggle, had revealed their vulnerabilities, their logical minds ripe for future manipulation. Xythar merely added Xylos Prime to its mental ledger of possibilities, a planet whose instability could be easily rekindled given time and the right catalyst. The warp rift, though diminished, never fully closed. It lingered as a permanent, faint tear in the veil above Xylos Prime, a faint scar that continued to bleed whispers into the void, a reminder of the insidious forces that had nearly claimed the world. For the Tau Empire, the lessons of Xylos Prime were profound and agonizing. The ethereal council, particularly Aunshi, who had initially championed understanding and integration, was forced to confront the limits of their empirical philosophy. The warp, once dismissed as primitive superstition, was now an undeniable, terrifying reality. The concept of demons, creatures of pure, malevolent chaos, could no longer be relegated to the classified archives of other, less enlightened species. They were a tangible, existential threat. A galaxy-spanning quarantine was immediately imposed on the Xylos system, a permanent interdict zone enforced by heavily armed Tau fleets. No ship was permitted entry, no resources allowed out. Automated deep space Auspex arrays were constantly updated and refined to detect even the faintest warp anomalies, a desperate attempt to quantify the unquantifiable. More significantly, the event sparked an agonizing internal debate within the Tau Empire. The Earth caste, shattered by the loss of Fio Vre Katano and the confrontation with unreality, began a desperate, clandestine project, the study of the warp. Under strict, ethereal oversight, and with layers of security so extreme they bordered on the paranoid, small teams of Earth caste scientists began to analyze the fragments of data, the philosophical implications, and the desperate accounts of their fire caste comrades. They sought to understand, to quantify, to find a scientific explanation for the madness, believing that only through knowledge could they truly defend themselves. But this pursuit was fraught with peril, a dangerous dance on the precipice of sanity, threatening to expose more Tau minds to the very chaos they sought to comprehend. The legacy of Shas-O Ta'usa resonated throughout the fire caste. His ultimate sacrifice, his defiant charge against impossible odds, became a legend whispered among the warriors. He was hailed as a true hero of the greater good. a warrior who embodied the highest ideals of selflessness and courage. But his tale also served as a grim reminder that even the greatest heroism could not guarantee survival against the forces that lurked in the dark, and that some battles demanded not just victory, but ultimate, absolute sacrifice. His name became a symbol of a new kind of war, a war against the unknowable, a conflict that could not be won with logic or technology alone. The Tao Empire had always looked outwards, towards expansion, towards bringing the light of the greater good to all sentient species. But Xylos Prime had forced them to look inwards, to question their own understanding, and to confront the terrifying truth that some darknesses could not be illuminated, only endured. They had glimpsed the true horror of the galaxy, the boundless malevolence that churned beyond the veil of their ordered universe. The experience left an indelible scar on the Tao soul, forever dimming the boundless optimism of the greater good with the stark, grim reality of the endless night. They were changed, forever gazing over their shoulders, knowing that the whispers from the void, though silenced for a time, would always return. Lore complete.